In video number 26, we learnt about the foreign exchange rate and the two systems to determine the value of foreign exchange. The fixed exchange rate system and the flexible exchange rate system. The fixed exchange rate system is that in which the rate is fixed by the government, and the flexible exchange rate system was that which was determined by the supply and demand forces in the international money market. Now, what is the equilibrium point where this foreign exchange rate is determined? Is given by the demand and the supply. The point at which the demand is equal to supply is the equilibrium point. Now, if the rate of exchange in the international money market happens to depart from this equilibrium point or equilibrium level, we will have a condition of either excess demand or excess supply. Excess demand or excess supply. So this portion we learnt as excess supply and this part we learnt as excess demand. Now, the pressure of this excess demand and supply in the market drives the exchange rate back to its equilibrium level. That is, the free play of forces of supply and demand would operate in such a manner that the equilibrium level of exchange rate is automatically restored. The effects of this change in demand and supply is what we are going to learn in this video number 27. So let's first learn increase in demand. What are the reasons and what are the effects of this increase in demand? Increase in demand occurs due to rise in imports of foreign goods and services. Then purchasing more financial assets abroad. And an increase in demand for foreign exchange for speculative purposes. And also an increase in transfer payments to foreign countries. These are some of the reasons for increase in demand for foreign exchange. Let's try to understand the effects of this increase in demand through a graph. On the x-axis, we plot the dollar, and on the y-axis, we plot the rupee. The demand and supply of dollars, and here rate of exchange. Due to increase in demand of foreign exchange, the demand curve shifts upward and to the right of the original demand curve. This is the original demand curve, and this moves to the right or upward. This is increase in demand. Now the supply of foreign exchange remains the same. An increase in demand will cause excess demand of foreign currency at the prevailing foreign exchange rate. So what will happen as a result? The equilibrium will shift and a new equilibrium rate of foreign exchange will be determined here. This was the original equilibrium point, and now it shifts upward, that is to this point. At this point, the exchange rate is higher than the previous rate or the prevailing foreign exchange rate. Thus, there will be a rise in the foreign exchange, let us say from 70 to 75. Other things remaining unchanged. Now, rise in price of foreign exchange from R to R1 implies depreciation of domestic currency. Depreciation of foreign currency, the domestic currency with respect to the foreign currency. So these are the causes and effects. The demand curve shifts outward or rightward, and there will be an excess demand for foreign exchange. The equilibrium rate will be higher than the prevailing rate. This is the prevailing rate, 70 rupees. But now it moves up, so the new rate would be 75 rupees. This change in rate of exchange will be called as depreciation of rupee or devaluation of rupee. Devaluation of rupee would mean that it becomes cheaper for the foreigners. Hence, there will be an increase in exports. Since the rate is more, that means we will land up paying more to the foreign countries or the rest of the world. There will be a fall in imports because imports will become expensive. Since exports are more than imports, there will be an increase in net exports. Hence, the net exports will be a positive value now. Since this is a positive value, it would show a rise in the national income. On the other hand, a decrease in demand would mean a shift in the demand curve leftward or downward, supply remaining the same. In that case, the equilibrium point, that is the prevailing rate of exchange, which is equal to 70, would now move down to, let us say, 65. So the equilibrium shifts from this point to this point. So it would cause an excess supply because supply at this point is more than this point. The exchange rate would be lower than the prevailing rate because at this point the exchange rate is R1. This would mean an appreciation of rupee or increase in the value of rupee when compared to the foreign exchange. This would also mean that the rupee becomes dearer or costlier in comparison with the foreign exchange rate. Hence, the demand curve would shift leftward or downward. A new equilibrium rate, that is lower than the prevailing rate, would form at this point. And this would also mean the exchange rate that would be appreciating the rupee. Appreciation of rupee would mean an increase in imports because now we will have to pay less. Instead of 70, we will be paying only 60 rupees. So there will be rise in imports. And there will be a fall in net exports, which is not good for the national income. The other condition is an increase in supply of foreign exchange. The reasons for increase in supply of foreign exchange is the rise in exports of goods and services from domestic country to the rest of the world, and an increase in foreign investments, that is foreign direct investments and FIIs, etc., where the foreign countries invest in the domestic countries. So there will be an inflow of the foreign currency, which would increase the supply of foreign exchange. There will also be an increase in the foreign tourism in India because tourism brings in the foreign exchange, or there will be an inflow of foreign exchange. Hence, there will be an increase in supply of foreign exchange. Now, if you want to understand this through a graph, the demand remaining the same, if there is an increase in supply, the supply curve would move down to the rightward. A rightward shift in the supply curve would mean that the equilibrium shifts from E1 to E2. And hence, a new rate of exchange would be got here at R1, that is from 70 to 65. This is appreciation of rupee. An appreciation of rupee would mean that it becomes cheaper for the rest of the world, and hence there would be it would become dearer for the foreigners, and hence there will be a decrease in exports, and the demand for imports increases because the dollar becomes cheaper, because now we will have to pay only 65 rupees instead of 70. Hence this increases imports. When imports increase, the net export value falls, which would bring a fall in the national income. The other condition is decrease in supply of foreign exchange. What does this mean? This would mean when the demand is the same for foreign exchange, the supply decreases, and hence the supply curve moves to the left. This would cause an excess demand for foreign currency. So a new equilibrium rate at this point would be formed. At this point, the foreign exchange rate is R1. Let us say from 70 it goes up to 75. The moment the rate of exchange moves from 70 to 75, it would be depreciation of rupee. A depreciation of rupee would mean rupee becomes cheaper for the foreigners, and hence the exports would increase because we would get more in return, and a fall in imports because we'll have to pay more. Since exports are greater than imports, the net export value will be a positive value. This would help in increasing the national income. Another aspect of this change in demand and supply are the interest rates and the exchange rate. Countries with higher interest rates attract investors because it often leads to an appreciation of domestic currency. And the demand curve shifts to the right and supply curve shifts to the left. So we will find a two-way shift. One, the demand curve shifting upward, and the supply curve shifting to the leftward. Income also influences the exchange rate. A rise in income would imply an increase in consumer spending. Consumer spending also includes imports. So there will be a shift in the demand curve towards the right. A rightward shift in the demand curve would mean depreciation of rupee. And if the income increases in the foreign country, we will find a rise in exports in the home country. So we can export more, and the supply curve shifts rightward. A rightward shift in the supply curve would mean appreciation of rupee. But if the aggregate demand of the domestic country grows at a faster rate than the rest of the world, then we say that the currency depreciates. What happens when currency depreciates? Imports will grow faster than exports. When imports grow faster than exports, there will be outflow of domestic currency, and this would bring down the national income. So the most important questions from this chapter are the three exchange systems and the role of the RBI, the impacts of change in exchange rates on the national income. We saw just now what happens when there is a change in demand and supply and how they would affect the national income, and the latest newspaper articles regarding the appreciation and depreciation of rupee would be some of the most important questions from this chapter.